We'll continue today. We are on the section of Hadith, within the section of Sunnah, page 64. So we are going to go through the basic terms in Hadith and the types of Hadith. Before doing that, it's important to understand Ilm al-Hadith is a massive subject in itself. So we are just discussing here the most relevant elements which is related to Usul-ul-Fiqh, which will help us in understanding the subject. But it's a whole subject in itself with a lot of in-depth works and explanation regarding many areas. So before going into the terminology, I will just explain some parts regarding the history of the science of Hadith, because today, especially in the time when the Kuffar and the Orientalists and some people who became deviants from the Muslims tried to cast doubt on the Hadith, and they tried to say, oh, the Hadith was compiled later on in the 2nd century after Hijrah, and therefore the Hadith are unreliable, and therefore we should just follow Quran. Last time we spoke about people like Ahl Quran, people like Gaddafi, the ruler in the Muslim world, who rejects the Sunnah. The same argument he uses to say that there is inconsistency in the Hadith, so we reject the Hadith. Of course, by that he became a murtad, an apostate from Islam. And there are others like the Orientalists, they write things like that. So some writers like Shah and others, they write that the Hadith are doubtful, that there's many conflicting reports. So some Muslims, they fall into that without knowledge. So they think, oh, that's true. Imam Bukhari lived, much later. He was in, over 100 years, 150 years after the Prophet. So how can it be that the compilation of Hadith can take place in that time, and therefore the Hadith as a whole are doubtful? So before going into the terminologies, it's just important I thought it's important to raise that issue, some of the history regarding the Hadith. So we need to know that, first of all, Rasulullah in his time forbade the companions from writing the Hadith because he did not want them to mix between the Quran and the Hadith, so to preserve the purity. However, he directly encouraged them to memorize, and to learn the Hadith. So we know amongst the famous narrators of the Hadith were people like Abu Hurairah, Abdullah ibn Umar, Ibn Abbas, Aisha radiallahu anha. They were the ones who specialized, or Abu Hurairah specifically, he lived in the mosque of the Prophet with the Ahl Suffah, the people who were poor, deliberately in order to learn the Hadith. And his whole mindset was regarding that. And of course Aisha radiallahu anha, she is also one of the most narrators of Hadith. She, of course, was from very young with Rasulullah, and we know the one who is in a young age, she can absorb a lot, and she used to memorize the Hadith, and she was one of the most knowledgeable in the Hadith. And we had other young companions like Abdullah ibn Umar, the son of Umar radiallahu anhu, who used to also do that. So when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, we know that the companions then started to write the Hadith, to record them, and to keep that, to make sure that they are there in the in a record. But at that time, still the Hadith were not all written and compiled and classified, right? But they were there, and the companions used to be very careful to narrate them accurately. So we know the narration when Umar radiallahu anh, somebody knocked on his door 3 times, one of the companions, and started to walk away. Umar opened the door and said, why are you walking away? He said, I heard Rasulullah say that you should knock 3 times, and if the door is not answered, then you should leave. He said, you better find someone to testify to what you have said. And the Sahabi was very worried about that. So he went and found other companions who verified. So we could see they had the mentality that Hadith are the words of Rasulullah or his actions or his consent, and therefore they need to be verified, they need to be, we need to make sure, and we need to be accurate, such that, for example, Umar radiallahu anh once rejected a narration from a woman not because she is a woman, but because he felt she is not good in memory, she is not good in accuracy. Now, how can I go against something established based upon someone who is not strong? So can you see the beginnings? We could say the beginnings of the issue of ilm al-hadith. Okay, it is, yes, it came as a science and was elaborated and all of that later on, but we can't say, it is a lie to say hadith started at the time of Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri or Bukhari. That's not correct. The hadith was there immediately after Rasulullah passing away. That the Sahaba would make ijtihad how? Based upon knowledge of the hadith. Okay, they would let's say correct each other based upon knowledge of the narration. So we know Ali radiallahu an in Iraq, when there was a sect of people who used to have the view of the Farsis that the ruler is a manifestation of God and all those things, and they started to worship Ali when he changed the capital of the Islamic State to Kufa from Medina. They started to worship him. So he dug a ditch for them, put them in and burnt them. They killed them. So Ibn Abbas radiallahu anh said, I heard Rasulullah said, do not punish with the punishment of Allah. So meaning that we should not punish with fire. So he corrected him based on the hadith. Okay, you see the issue, i.e. amongst the companions, they would, because all of them spent certain time with Rasulullah and had certain knowledge, but it was not that they had all the knowledge of the Sunnah. Okay, some of them may have heard a hadith which the other did not. So that's why they used to consult each other also in matters. Sometimes they would, like many times, they would raise a discussion in shura with the companions. Okay, and if somebody objected, they may say, I have heard from Rasulullah this and this. Okay, so this is the way that the time of the companions, which is from ijma'. Okay, that they used to accept the hadith as a source of evidence, as we have discussed the Sunnah as the second source of law in Islam. It is true then what happened is in the time of fitna, okay, basically the time of fitna, which was the civil war between Ali and Muawiyah. Okay, we know after the assassination of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu, we know there was a period of civil war, that the cousin of Uthman, Muawiyah, who was the governor of Asham, became very emotional in the matter of finding the killers of Uthman. And Ali radiallahu anh became the Khalifa and did not immediately find the killers, and there was a civil war based on that. And that civil war lasted for some time. Muawiyah rejected giving bay'ah to Ali, and he continued after that. And then after Ali's death, then Imam Hassan became the Khalifa. Muawiyah again rejected him, then he abdicated the power after 6 months, and then Muawiyah became the Khalifa. Then after that, it's a complicated history. Muawiyah tried to enforce the bay'ah for his son, but the rest of the Sahaba in Hijaz, they rejected that. They wanted to give the bay'ah to Imam Hussein, who was killed. Then they gave the bay'ah to Abdullah ibn Zubair. So again, the civil war resumed. Okay, there was a civil war, it continued. So Yazid versus Abdullah bin Zubair. Then Yazid died, then his son Muawiyah bin Yazid continued. Then he abdicated, then Marwan ibn Hakam, then Abdul Malik bin Marwan. Anyway, there was a long period of civil war. Let's say 30 years roundabout, okay? Now, in that period, what happened is that people started to fabricate hadith to justify their faction. Okay? This is the beginning of the fabrication of hadith. Okay? So people say, no, we are right, because they would just say, Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam this about Muawiyah, for example. Okay? And so on. So now, there was fabrication going on. Okay? So after this period, after the civil war ended, of course, during the civil war as well, the companions who were living, they were careful about that, and they tried to scrutinize, but they were in war. After that period, when Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, rahimullah, who was a great Khalifa of the Muslims, who came after the rulers from the Umayyads who were a bit tyrannical, like Abdul Malik and his son. He came after, and actually he rejected his heritage. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he is one of the great Khulafa who people consider is a Khalifa from Khulafa ar-Rashidin, even though he is later on, or they consider him as a great Khalifa, because he rejected the actions of Yazid and all those things and tyranny, and he was a just ruler. So he was worried about the matter of hadith. So he appointed, and as well as the Islamic State had expanded, so it was going to vast lands. So there was a risk that the hadith could be lost. Maybe somebody will die by knowing the hadith, and that he knows it and it's not narrated, it's not compiled, and all those things. So, and at this time there were few companions as well. There were companions who were living still. So he appointed Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, who was, we can say, the scholars called him the master of the science of hadith, because he was the first who was given the task by the Khalifa to go and do that, to go and compile, to go and find from the companions. So he had learnt from a group of the young Sahaba, because of course the old Sahaba had all passed away. The ones who were young, like we know the young Sahaba, like the sons of the prominent companions, like Ibn Umar, Ibn Abbas, and so on. They continued. Anas ibn Malik, for example, he was very young when Rasulullah came to Medina, and he was one of the narrators, famous narrators of hadith. We know the story of Anas ibn Malik, for example, that the Ansar, he was from the Ansar, people were giving money as contribution for jihad and as contribution, and his mother did not have wealth to do that. So she said to Rasulullah, I do not have wealth, so take my son. So Anas ibn Malik was given as like to Rasulullah. That's why he spent a lot of time. And he was the last of the companions to die. So he was asked in his time, are there any one of the companions of Rasulullah left? He said, no, I am the last of the companions. Even though there were people who had met Rasulullah, but that's a different discussion, we will go later on, that there is difference between suhbah, companionship, and somebody who had just seen Rasulullah. So we will go into it later on. So this is some of the history. Az-Zuhri also, he knew some of the young of Sahaba and senior from the Tabi'een. The Tabi'een were the students of the Sahaba. So he then he started recording the hadith he went, for example, Ibn Jurayj in Mecca, Imam Malik in Medina, Hamad bin Salama in Basra, Sufyan al-Thawri, al-Awza'i. These are the big names, in that period of time. Now, this was in the 2nd century after Hijrah. 2nd century meaning after 100 years. The 2nd century begins. Now, at that time, Az-Zuhri was compiling the hadith as well as sayings of the companions, sayings of the Tabi'een, Fatawa of the Sahaba. So it was many things he's compiling, not only hadith. Then later we found that the one who became distinguished, let us say he became the best in the science of hadith, was Imam Bukhari. From a very young age, he was interested in hadith from very young age. His first book of hadith, Al-Adab al-Mufrad, was when he was 18 years old. He was from very young, from 15 years old. We know his mother had pushed him to study hadith, and he would go and debate with the scholars. There would be scholars quoting, for example, some narration is there, the scholar is quoting the hadith, and he says, it is from Fulan person, from this Sahabi, from this man. So Imam Bukhari, who was a young boy, said, do you permit me to speak? He said, yes. He said, how can this be? Because this Tabi'i lived in a different place to the Sahabi you mentioned, and it's impossible for them to meet. So your narration is wrong. And the scholar said to his assistants, check the books. So they checked what was written, and they found that the scholar has mispronounced the name. And that is why, meaning the names can be, if he mispronounces, he means someone else, but he said somebody else. So what Bukhari said was correct. So he was an expert, he was, let's say, brilliant within that science. So he was the one who, his collection became the most famous. Okay, and he was the one who just collected the hadith of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and was quite strict in the authentication. He did not just accept anyone's narration. He would authenticate. There are narrations like there was a man who was leading someone. He was playing with the donkey, with the carrot, and leading the donkey, and all these things. And Imam Bukhari saw him. He said, I cannot accept he is a trustworthy reporter of hadith. Just from that, he is an odd man. Why is he doing these funny things? And it's beyond the norm in his time. Even somebody who used to eat in the road, although we are used to that today, at that time it was uncommon. People would not eat when they are walking in the road. Somebody walking in the road, he would not consider him as a strong reporter. Because he is doing something odd. If he is doing something odd, then that is possible he can do something odd in narration of hadith. So he was very strict in accept. That's why in terms of authenticity, Bukhari comes first in the books of hadith. Okay, so it is the topmost in authenticity. Then it is followed by Muslim bin al-Hajjaj, who is a student of Imam Bukhari. So therefore he followed the same line of thinking, and his compilation follows the same line. So generally they are called, when you read in the books and they say this is reported in the Sahihain, the two Sahihs, or sometimes the scholars just say this is reported by Imamain, the two Imams. That's it. Then that is in Bukhari and Muslim. So they are known as the most authentic collections in hadith. But doesn't mean they are the only authentic. Okay, it just means that they are the most strictest. And we found that later on that science, it became a science in itself. Okay, after the time, Bukhari Ilm al-Hadith became a science in itself, and such that people would dedicate their lives in scrutinizing. Because when they would put the books of hadith, they would not, like just today we have the abridged and summarized versions. They would put also the description, they call it Asma or Rijal, the characteristics and let's say description of the reporters. Okay, so say it's reported by these people, but included was their biography, the biography of the reporters. He is this, he is he is trustworthy, he is this, this man, he is got an odd memory, this man, they would put everything. Okay, so it would be biography of all the reporters. That's why, like today, when we want to find a hadith, we can go to the books of takhrij, what they call it, of authenticity. We can find out easily. Now it's just, you just have a database, everything is there, and you just type it in, and we can get in Arabic, all those things. So we say, oh, this hadith, it is da'if, the reporter is known to be a liar. Okay, we can find it easily. So they dedicated their whole lives, so for example, in the science of hadith, before we go into the terminologies, we can mention some of the, let's say, the specific terms that we used in hadith. For example, the muhaddith, we use the term muhaddith to mean that somebody who is just an expert in the science of hadith. Okay, a muhaddith is used for that. Then we have, for example, the term hafiz, okay, in hadith, not hafiz of Quran. So when we use the term hafiz of hadith, okay, sometimes you will see before the scholar's name it says hafiz al-Dhahabi. Okay, hafiz means he knows 100,000 hadith by heart. Okay, so hafiz. If they use the term hujjah means he knows 300,000 hadith by heart. Okay, I mean those times they would not just be like today relying on books. They would memorize. They would commit their lives to memorizing the hadith, so they have a basic knowledge. It's like a database. Like today we have database, so you don't need to do that. But that time they didn't have database. The database is in the memory. Okay, so they would, this hadith, they would say, okay, it's this narrated from here, from here, from here. They'd have the database. The Hujjah is the one who has 300,000 hadith, and the Hakim is the one who has the whole Sunnah. The whole Sunnah, every single hadith in memory. Yes, that's Al-Hakim, like for example, Al-Mustadrak from Al-Hakim. The book Al-Mustadrak, he knows the whole Sunnah. You understand? So that is within the Muhaddithin, there is a subcategorization. Somebody who's memorized the whole Sunnah, every single hadith. Right? So we see that there's the science of hadith, what the kuffar and the Orientalists try to allude to it, that it is something doubtful and speculative, and all. This is a nonsense. Okay? It became a science which is strict, and they put so many conditions, and it became a developed thing. Okay? Such that, when we say something is sahih, we know it is sahih. If it has been categorized as sahih, because they have gone through, scrutinization of that, right? So this is some background knowledge. I didn't want to go through full history, but so that we just appreciate the science of hadith is not doubtful. It's not just all weak and all of that. There is a proper science, backing that. Okay, we can go into the terminologies of the hadith, so we can then realize that. Okay, the first term which we are using here is the sanad, the chain of reporters leading back to Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So sanad or isnad means chain, it is the plural. Okay, it's about the chain. So when we say how is the isnad of this, how is the sanad of this hadith? So you're talking about the chain. Oh, it's narrated from this tabi'i, or tabi'in to tabi'i to sahaba, or to one of the sahabi. So it's about the chain. The tabaqa is the class of reporters in the same generation, i.e. the sahaba, tabi'in, i.e. which tabaqa, which generation. Marfu is a hadith whose sanad leads to Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Mawquf is a hadith whose sanad ends with a sahabi, meaning the narration ends with a companion and it doesn't go directly back to the Prophet. Mursal is a hadith leading to Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam but missing the name of the sahabi who reported it. So for example, like I mentioned last time, if one of the scholars in the tabi'in, like Sa'id ibn Jubair, Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, who are the great scholars of the tabi'in, if they narrate something, they say Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said this. Now they miss the name of the companion. So now there is ikhtilaf in the scholars. Some say we don't accept it, we consider as da'if. Some say no, because of the authenticity of Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, authenticity of Sa'id ibn Jubair and so on, we don't reject, we accept it. Okay, we cannot say it's the highest category, but we accept it as dalil. We can accept, for example, they may say it is hasan. Okay, they may not say it is sahih, they may say it is less than that, or they put a category, they record it is mursal. Okay, for example, the hadith of Mu'adh bin Jabal of what will you rule by the Quran, and if I do not find the answer by the Sunnah, if you do not find the answer, I will make ijtihad. The hadith is mursal, but it has become well known amongst the ulama and they accepted it. So it is something which it's not necessarily rejected. Then the hadith Qudsi, it is the hadith whose sanad leads to Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the Prophet is reporting it from Allah. We know it's the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is narrating his own words. This is said by Allah, and we explain that it can be in two ways. The Prophet saying that this is reported by Allah, or Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala has said as reported by the Messenger. Either way it is recorded, it is on either of these two ways, right? So these are some basic terminologies. Okay, some other terms maybe it's not included here. The matan, when we talk about the matan of hadith, it means the meaning. Okay, so when we say the hadith, the isnad or the sanad is the chain, the matan is the meaning. Right? So matan is to do with the meaning of hadith. That's an important terminology. Okay, So we have to appreciate that. Now, the types of hadith, okay, we have discussed before, but now we will discuss in more depth this matter. Different types of hadith. Ahadith is the plural of hadith, okay. So generally in Arabic, when we say imam is singular, imma is plural, okay, you added alif, okay. So it exists due to the method of transmission, number of reporters in each class, and the authenticity of the hadith. So here is just describing there are different categorization within the hadith. The first, which is the strongest of the hadith, is the mutawatir or tawatur. A dalil transmitted by an indefinite number of people due to the large number of people reporting the dalil and their diversity of residence, reliability and conviction. It is inconceivable that this dalil could be fabricated. The minimum number of transmitters are required to classify dalil as mutawatir is generally 5, because we discussed last time, because of the ayah in the Quran about testimony, that if there are 4 and they are unknown, the 5th must be there to verify their testimony. However, some scholars may have more stringent criteria. There are some scholars that put additional, they say minimum number is 15, 17, 40. They put some other numbers. Some scholars have more stringent for mutawatir. The character of the reporters narrating mutawatir hadith has to be noble, okay? So not just 5 people, any 5 people like Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, or great people who in their character are known to be trustworthy and so on. So this is hadith mutawatir, i.e. the strongest form which we considered when we explained early on. We said it is, we described it that it is qat'i riwayah. Okay, it is definitive narration. So I can go into it a bit more detail if you want, in terms of the conditions of hadith mutawatir. For example, Shaykh Taqiyuddin Nabhani in his book Shakhsiyah Islamiyah Volume 1, he goes into ilm al-hadith and more detail. So we can just go through some of the points that he mentions. He says, number 1, the number of transmitters should be such that they are a group and not restricted by any specific number. So whatever number proves to be a group, that is considered mutawatir. Meaning it doesn't have to be necessarily 5, it must be a group. However, it is not allowed to be below 5. Okay, he explains that 4 is not enough because 4 are in need of another to attest their integrity, tazkiyah, if nothing is known about them when they give testimony for zina, which is from Quran. The group accredited for tawatur is that it should need any attestation until it is definite by the mere notification of the report. Basically, it's saying 5 is the minimum, but not only 5. 2, it should preclude the collusion on a lie. This is very important. Okay, that it's not just that it is reported by as 5 people. It should preclude any possibility that somebody could lie or mistake or fabrication or something. Okay, so for example, especially in the time of fitna, there may be 5 people who report something, but there is political motivation. They are reporting a hadith in favor of their political faction. Then you see the point here. So it's not necessary that just because of number. It should be that they should preclude that. So it differs according to the difference of the person and places. And so 5 people like Ali bin Abi Talib is sufficient to consider the report as mutawatir. Probably with other people 5 may not be sufficient. Okay, with other people who are not like from the senior most companions, maybe they have seen the Prophet, they have spent little time, but the scholars of hadith more stringent. Because they are, maybe it's possible they could say something wrong. 5 transmitters who have not met from 5 different countries may be enough for the report to be considered as mutawatir, i.e. now important point. There may be 5 people, maybe they are not all in the highest category of like from the people who have been promised Jannah. But because the scholars of hadith, they were not sitting at home. Their whole life is dedicated to finding the hadith. That's their whole life. Imam Malik would sit outside someone's house. They would travel great distances we have heard there is hadith, someone narrating hadith in that city, 1,000 miles away, they would go there. Imam Bukhari was from where? Bukhara, where is that? Uzbekistan. Okay, he's from Uzbekistan, the ex-Soviet Union. Okay, Imam Tirmidhi, same. Uzbekistan. They would travel the whole Muslim world, okay, to find the hadith. So it wasn't that they were sitting at home, yani. So maybe they have found in 5 different cities, 5 different narrators who have not met. Okay, and they all report the same hadith, lafzi, by the same words. Okay, from 5 different chains. Okay, so not from the same chain. Remember, mutawatir hadith is about 5 companions narrating the same hadith, not 5 tabi'in. Okay, minimum. For example, Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu could have narrated the same hadith to 50 people. The hadith is not mutawatir, because it is one man narrating. You understand? In the tabaqa of the Sahaba, in the category of the Sahaba, the tawatur must emanate from there, not later on. Yeah, there may be one Sahabi narrated to 1,000 people, still, it is still khabar ahad. It must be that the more than 5 Sahaba, i.e. a number of Sahaba have narrated. So, a man in Iraq, he narrates from Ali radiallahu anhu. A man in Misr, he narrates from Ibn Abbas. Okay? A man in, let's say, Iran, he is narrating from Ibn Umar. A man in Asham, okay, he is narrated from Anas ibn Malik. A man in Yemen narrating from Aisha. Okay, the same hadith. Okay, and they have not met. This is again an example of where something the scholars would consider as tawatur. Because how could they have not even met each other? How could they be lying? It's impossible for them to be lying. It's not like today you can SMS each other. Okay, there is no communication. So this precludes the possibility of a lie, so they classify it as definite. Yeah? So that's important. That the same number transmit the report from the beginning until the end of the transmission, precluding the collusion or a lie. If their number do not reach that amount, i.e. the first 2 conditions should be met in every tier of transmitters. This is important. 5 Sahabi may have narrated, okay, the report, but you find only 3 of the Tabi. But the 3 have heard it from the 5 combined. Not enough. The minimum number of tawatur must be in each category, not only in one category. So in the Sahaba, in the Tabi, in the Tabi'in, okay. Normally in the Hadith mutawatir, there are more than that anyway, okay, the ones which are established. 4, the basis of their conclusion should be sense perception by hearing and other such senses, not what the pure reason establishes, because it can make mistakes if it is not based on sense perception. It does not amount to certainty. The value, hukam of the mutawatir report is that it yields ilm dhururi, positive knowledge, i.e. knowledge you must believe in. It is what man is compelled to accept, such that he is unable to refute it. It is inescapable because it does not require study, i.e. the mutawatir reports impart certainty, yaqeen. The mutawatir report is divided into 2 categories, verbal, lafzan, mutawatir. So this is important now. Within mutawatir, there are 2 types. Here we are not going into so much depth because the aim of the book is not to go into ilm al-hadith. There are many books on that. We are just giving briefly the concepts. But just for our own benefit here, it's important sometimes. There is 2 types of mutawatir. Mutawatir lafzi, mutawatir ma'nawi. Mutawatir by the lafzan, by the words, okay, meaning exactly the same hadith is reported in wording, exactly. Okay, like the hadith, whosoever intentionally lies about me, let him preserve his place in the hellfire. This is mutawatir lafzan, by the words. The same hadith is reported exactly, okay, by many of the companions. Okay, so this is by words. Then there is mutawatir ma'nawi, okay, which is mutawatir by meaning, not by words. Okay, Mutawatir by meaning there are so many Sahaba who narrated the same concept, the same issue. Okay? But by various different chains and various different words. So, for example, the issue of the Sunnah of the morning prayer between being 2 rakat, okay, of Fajr, being 2 rakat. It is mutawatir ma'nawi. Okay? It is not lafzi that the same words have been used, but there are so many chains, all of them say it's 2, Fajr is 2. It's mutawatir ma'nawi. Okay? Mutawatir lafzi, there are other examples like the hadith of wiping upon the socks, masa, is mutawatir. The hadith of the Hawd, the river in paradise, the hadith of Shafa, intercession of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam on Yawm al-Qiyamah, the hadith of Rafi Adain, these are mutawatir, lafzi. Okay? So these are some other examples just so as to know that. So there is lafzan ma'nawi. I'll give you another example of mutawatir ma'nawi. To have more than one central ruler, i.e. to have more than one imam or more than one khalifa over the Muslims, okay, is haram and mutawatir ma'nawi. There are so many different hadith from so many different chains, from different companions, prohibiting that we can have more than one khalifa over the Muslims. So therefore, somebody to deny this as a concept negates mutawatir, i.e. it goes against iman. Okay, so if the hadith, which is hadith sahih on its own, إِذَا بُؤْيَتِينَ خَلِيفَتَيْنِ فَاقْتُلُوا آخِرُ مِنْهُمَا, if the bay'ah is given to more than one khalifa, kill the latter of them. Then another hadith, also in Muslim, that if you are united under one man, somebody comes to divide you, kill him. Okay, the hadith, if you are on a journey, appoint one only as the amir. The hadith which said it is not allowed for 3 of you to be anywhere in the world without one as an amir. The hadith, so many hadith about the same subject, that in Islam we have singular leadership. This is mutawatir ma'nawi. Another example of mutawatir ma'nawi, the fact that the Islamic rule, the khilafah will return. It is mutawatir ma'nawi. Although there are many hadith individually which are sahih, in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, which talk about the different eras of time, and the last area being ثُمَّ تَكُونُ خِلَافَةً عَلَى مِنْهَاجِ النُّبُوَّةِ. The hadith about justice and injustice, that justice will come and injustice will vanish. Okay, and the Prophet started, after me, injustice will appear. Okay, and slowly. And justice will start to vanish until people are born only under injustice. Like today. Then again, justice will reappear and injustice will vanish until people are born only under justice. Okay? And the hadith, so many of them, talking about, and we will take, Rasulullah gave glad tidings to the one who takes the city of Harakal or Heraclius, the city of Constantinople, and Rome. Rome has never been taken, so it's about a future victory. The hadith about Islam entering every house, by madar or wabar, i.e. by mud or brick, and with the izzah of Islam and the humiliation of kufr. And so many narrations. And so it is mutawatir ma'anawi. It is definitive by meaning that the Islamic rule, the khilafah will return again. Okay, so this is an example. So we should realize that in mutawatir we have these 2 types. Okay. Before going into the other categories, maybe we will pause if there are any questions. Yes. Yes. Yes.
The narratives that report on the same event, or is it the Sunnah, the chain of reporters that?
Okay. It has to be the narrators in each category. So 5 companions have narrated about the same matter. 2 more than 5 or 5 tabi'in, and they have narrated more than 5 or 5 tabi'in. Okay. So in each category there must be minimum 5, but not only 5 people of good character. So normally the scholars actually don't accept 5 unless they are very... So if 5 companions narrated to 5 scholars from the Tabi'in who are well known to be just and good Muslims and all of that, then maybe they would accept. But not just to anyone. So yeah, it's in each category.
You say isnad and then matan.
Yes.
Okay. So isnad is related to riwayah.
Yes.
And matan is related to the meaning.
Yes.
So is it that based on that we can say qat'i riwayah for the hadith?
Yes. Yani if we want to talk about in hadith terminology, yes, we can say, is the isnad, is it tawatur? So then we are talking, is it qat'i? And is the matan definitive? Is it qat'i? Because the matan maybe it is not clear cut. It may not be definitive in meaning. So that's something that's to be appreciated. Yeah. So but generally in ilm al-hadith they use this term matan for the text of the hadith. What is the actual matan of the hadith? Okay, because for example it is allowed to convey hadith by meaning. It is not haram for me to explain, Rasulullah said this but not in the exact wording. So somebody will say, what is the matan of the hadith? Maybe, if they want to know the exact, I may convey it by the meaning. So then they would refer to the back to the matan for the original wording.
Okay, going back to this answer,
Yes.
you said you were confined about
Yes.
now, the Sahaba is one of the Quran was compiled.
Yes.
Okay? But at least after the Quran was compiled, why was it that it wasn't a mistake from the part of the Sahabas for not compiling the hadith earlier on rather than after a period of time?
No, yes.
Question,
Yes.
who was the Khalif who told to compile the hadith?
Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. No, it's not correct to say that the hadith were not recorded at all.
Also, is there possibility that once Sahabis who died in Mecca may have possibility
Yes.
of losing
Yes. Yes, but we have a way of resolving that. Two things. First, that it is not correct to say that the Sahaba did not compile or did not record the hadith. I started by saying that is not true. After the Prophet died, they started to write. Okay, like Abu Hurairah started to compile, started to write, but it was not as comprehensive, because we have to realize when Rasulullah ﷺ passed away, the Sahaba already, Mu'adh ibn Jabal was not there. We had people who were spread out already. Somebody was the wali of Bahrain, somebody was the wali of Oman, and it was not like today. In today's time, it is foreseeable. We could just have an online meeting and resolve everything. In that time, you would have to travel for days even to read, and they were ruling. You can't take them out of their position, and you are in war also. So how can you do it? How can you go and compile everything? Okay. So what they did is they did the best at their time. There we can't say they made an error in that. No, they did what was needed for the time, right? And then later on, when the Khalifa saw that there was a possibility of things being lost and so on, then it was a very good decision to appoint somebody to just specialize in this task and go everywhere and to do that. Yeah. So this is the issue. Like for example, the compilation of Quran, it is something easier than the compilation of Hadith. Why? Because Quran is already written. Mus'haf is already there. All you need to do is verify with the companions who are there. Zayd did not have to travel to very far, and he had to travel to Yemen. And no, they are all there in Hijaz. Everyone, all of the Sahaba, who is enough. So many of them just to verify what was written. Okay, and to check it and to verify and to buy their memory. So it is something which was easy. The compilation of Quran was something very practical. And it could be done. Whereas the compilation of hadith, in the same way and writing everything, it was not something which they could see as a very easy thing. Okay, so it was later on in the period of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, which that task then became a priority. So it wasn't that there was nothing written. It wasn't that there was nothing, like even Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam himself in hadith, he referred to the Quran and the Sunnah that they will be written. Himself, he talked about al-waraq al-mu'allaq, the hanging papers, because the Sahaba and the Muslims, Tabi'in, when they used to write Quran and hadith, they used to put it in a position of honor. Okay? So they used to put it high, and not to, because it's the word of Allah, the word of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, so it is referred to as the hanging papers. So Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said in a hadith that there will come a people who will take al-waraq al-mu'allaq, the hanging papers, and work according to that, and work to establish that, for example. So it is well known that the hadith, it was just not so comprehensive until the time of al-Zuhri. Okay, then the comprehensiveness, we can say. For example, the Sahaba did write, Ibn Abbas has his own tafsir also. Tafsir of Ibn Abbas. You can get it. It's not on the full Quran, but it is the tafsir. So in the tafsir of Ibn Abbas, because tafsir is of two types, one is ijtihad and one is from athar, from narration, and from also including, there is tafsir of Quran by Sunnah, okay, by the hadith. So he is included. He is written that. And that is recorded. Somebody can go to the tafsir of Ibn Abbas. Okay? So they did record, but it was not just so comprehensive. The comprehensiveness to exclude, or minimize what is lost is what was done later on. Yeah? And your question about if some Sahabi may have died by knowing some hadith, yes, of course that is possible, but then that's why we have Ijma' Sahaba, which fills in those holes. Because the ijma' of the Sahaba is dalil. If the Sahaba consent to a matter, okay, then if something was not reported, the ijma', because now the Tabi'in did not only compile hadith, they wrote that, they also compiled the sayings of the companions. The Tabi'in were there was two schools, Ahlul Hadith and Ahlul Ray. They were the students of companions. They would record what their companions who taught them has taught them, even their sayings. That's why you find the books of athar, the books of narration from the companions. Okay, so they report, okay, Ibn Abbas's statements, Ali radiallahu anhu's statements. These are the books of narration of companions. So now we find that if something is classified as ijma', it was recorded. So the ijma' of the Sahaba, it is there to fill in gaps where it's possible hadith may have not been reported to us, and therefore the Sahaba seem to be doing something which is not based on hadith, but because it's ijma', then we know they're doing it based on dalil, which we have already discussed yesterday. Like I gave the example of Jerusalem, that not allowing the Jews to live inside, and such things, which are not reported in hadith, but they are from ijma'. Yeah. It's coming. We're going to discuss. Now it's very easy. Now we don't need to reinvent and go back and study like those scholars. Those scholars had the job. Today it's very easy. Anyone like the hadith, everyone commonly quotes, the Prophet ﷺ came back from battle, apparently, what they say, and said, I have come from the lesser jihad to the greater jihad. It's very easy today. You don't need to, like one of my ustads, Sheikh Ali Said Abul Hassan, somebody said, oh, don't we need to become muhaddith today? Don't we need? He said, why? You just have database. Why do you need to go into ilm al-hadith? It is not priority. You just have the hadith database, with every single hadith and the books of takhrij and the books of everything. You just type it in, khalas. So you type in that narration. What happens? You find Ibn Hajar Asqalani rejects it. He said it's mawdu'. The scholars, they say it is the saying of a man called Ibrahim Abi Ya'la. It is not a hadith. Okay? So they go and they just say, so it's very easy. The hadith which people claim that, seek knowledge even if it is in China. Yes, the concept is correct, but it is not hadith. You type it in, you will find. The scholars say it is fabrication. It is not hadith. People say, Hubbul watan min al-iman, loving your land is part of iman. You type it in, it is not found in any book of hadith. We know that it is fabrication. It's made up later on. by the rulers to justify themselves. Okay, so many things. So today it's actually easy to find because we rely upon the books of what have already been compiled about the strong and the weak and so on. In that time, in the time with the scholars of hadith, yes, they had developed a science, and we will talk about that. What is da'if, and they've got 7 categories of da'if, and where there's a break in the chain, where there's unreliability. It's a detailed thing. We will go into it. Yes.
I want you to distinguish narrating and transmitting with an example. Like the difference between narrating an hadith and transmitting an hadith with an example and its change.
What do you mean narrating a hadith and transmitting? What do you mean by that? The only distinction I can see is somebody may narrate the exact wording, okay, or somebody may transmit an incident. So somebody may say some hadith about especially the aqwal, i.e. the sayings of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They would say, قال Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, كل عمل ليس عليه أمرنا فهو رد. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, any action done not in accordance with what I brought, it is rejected. So this is an example of narration exactly of the words. Okay, transmission maybe we were with Rasulullah and we saw this. Okay, as an example, that's not narration of his words. So that is really the only distinction that I can see from what you're saying. Because narration is narration, linguistically they're similar. Okay. Unless you mean something specific, then you clarify what you mean. Yeah.
So transmitting is from one to another.
Yes. Okay, yes, that may be an issue. If something is narrated, then you're just taking the actual narration and transmitting it on. You are putting it on. So you are not the narrator of the hadith. You are the transmitter. Fine, we can make that distinction. So the tabi'in were not the narrators of the hadith. They were the transmitters. The sahaba were the narrators. Yeah? So that's fine, that distinction.
One question regarding the authenticity.
Yes.
It's a collective question. Like, since we have Quran, we have the hadith. In hadith, we have categorization. We have al-hakim and so many categorizations and stuff, right? So having all these based on the opinion given by the Mustahids from Hanafi Rahmatullah alayhi to Az-Zahiri Madhab. Yeah?
Yes.
So, for example, if you take the Taqweed, it starts from the chest and goes on till the only Imam he says that.
Yes. Yes.
So, having these all things so very precise and clear about the hadith and the categorizations and authenticity, how come there is a huge difference in just an example of Taqweed?
Yeah, but again, the example here is not to do with riwayah. For example, praying like this and like this, both are mutawatir. Both are mutawatir. The issue is now in the meaning. Is it mandub or is it wajib? You see the point? Okay, or is it mubah? So here, for example, I pray like this, but for me it's mubah to pray like this. Permitted. Okay, so, but it is mandub, recommended to pray like this. You see the issue? So the debate is not necessarily to do with the narration. Both schools do not reject the narration. They are discussing the meaning and the hukum. So just because it comes back to the point, just because something is qat'i riwayah doesn't mean that dalala, the meaning of it is clear or definitive. You see the whole point, okay? So, yes. So that must be understood.
What did you say about al-hakim?
It is a category, the term. So of course, it is a category, the one who knows the whole sunnah by memory. So they don't just know 100,000 or 200,000 or 300. They know every single hadith which has ever been reported. Okay, by the chain, not just the hadith, by the chain. By the chain, okay. By memory. Of course, that is a great feat. It's amazing. The ones who have photographic memory and they have qada from Allah in that, they are.
So when they quote al-hakim.
Yeah, that is the name of one of the muhaddithin who is in the category. Okay, so he just became known as that. Okay, but if we go into his real name, then it goes into his name is this and that. So it is, and Hafid, like Hafid. And sometimes Al-Hafiz said in At-Takhlis. Al-Hafiz is who? Actually, he's a man. His name is not Hafiz. He's just, he's known as Hafiz. He's Hafiz of Hadith. Okay. Hafiz Ibn Kathir also. Ibn Kathir, Hafiz Ibn Kathir. Why? Not he is Hafiz of Quran. Hafiz of Hadith. Okay. So it's a Hafiz al-Dhahabi. Yeah, it's like that. So it's a title within Ilm al-Hadith. Within the Muhaddithin.
Regarding the authenticity, Bukhari, Muslim, in comparing with the Tabi'in and Tabi'in, you said the authenticity is, they did a science of Hadith was there in Bukhari and Muslim, it's more authentic.
No, I didn't say that. I said the Bukhari and Muslim were the ones who were the strictest. They are the ones who compiled from the Tabi'in, and scrutinized the chains, went to different locations, went to learn hadith from everywhere, okay? And so, what I'm saying is their compilations are considered as the strongest in category, okay? So, the scholars have different views on the authenticity, but generally it is agreed that Bukhari is first, then Muslim. Or a hadith, so they categorize. So they first say a hadith in Bukhari and Muslim is the strongest, if it's Khabar Ahad, if we're talking Khabar Ahad here. So Sahih, Bukhari and Muslim. Then Bukhari alone, then Muslim alone. Okay? Then hadith from any other book that matches the conditions of Bukhari and Muslim. Because they may be compilers later on who are there, but the conditions they have used, although they are not in Bukhari Muslim, but they match the conditions of Bukhari Muslim. Okay? Then the other books of Sahih. Okay? Then, so they put a way of prioritizing amongst the hadith in terms of the strength of authenticity. No, muttafaqan alayh means it is accepted by everyone.
Unacceptable.
Agreed upon. Yes. So Bukhari and Muslim, when we say it is in the Sahihain, it is in the Ibid means when we have a reference, for example, if you have Bukhari chapter number this, if we put Ibid chapter number this, it means what is before that. So Ibid means the title above, so it means Bukhari in this case. Ibid is just a term used in references. Okay? Some people, like one brother, thought Ibid is a reference work. No, Ibid means, in English, it is a term used for references. It means that go to the earlier reference already quoted. So instead of quoting the whole thing, they just say, it's a Ibid, chapter this, verse, number this.
Like in the past, they wouldn't put Bukhari or Muslim because everybody would know it. It is only now that the persistence of people.
Yeah, so if we put the whole thing, we put, like if we want to give many references from the same book, okay, in one page, we would put Bukhari, chapter this, hadith this at the beginning. Then every other reference would be Ibid. Ibid, chapter this, hadith this. Ibid, which has been referring back to the... Yeah?
On what basis do we evaluate the authenticity in Tabi and Tabi?
We will come to that. We haven't discussed it. It comes in the section of evaluating the strength of hadith. That's there in the types of Khabar Ahad and all those things. Yeah? Yes, that is true. The reason, it's a good question. The reason why is that some of the companions, although they were closer to Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, like Abu Bakr, Umar, they were his assistants. However, Abu Hurairah dedicated his whole life to the issue of hadith. Okay? Whereas Abu Bakr and Umar were rulers. They were the assistants of Rasulullah in ruling, which we know from hadith. My two wazirs in the akhirah, Mikail and Jibreel, in the dunya, Abu Bakr and Umar. So they were rulers, they were implementers. So therefore now, they did not spend their whole life just studying and learning hadith. Whereas the young companions, many of them just spent their life trying to follow. Like Anas ibn Malik was also in that, just learning hadith. Also, one of the other, in terms of frequency of narrators, or in terms of numbers of hadith, Aisha radiallahu anha, it's obvious. She was his wife from very young. And the scholars put that as one of the wisdoms in the marriage of Rasulullah to Aisha. Because of course the kuffar, they always say, oh, why did he marry a young girl and all of that? Because here, you need, it's one of the wisdoms that she was young so she could digest. And she is one of the most narrators of hadith. So she spent time, she was the wife of Rasulullah, and she would narrate so many things. Okay, that many other people would not maybe have known. Especially how would we know about the personal life of the Prophet, the personal ahkam, the intimate things, all those. Aisha narrated most of those hadith. Right? So that is some of the reasons. Of a mawquf is a hadith whose sanad ends with a sahabi. Here, for example, where the hadith, where we still say is a hadith, but it is not saying Qala Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Okay? So, the hadith, which is the famous one because of Ramadan now, of Qurayb, about Ibn Abbas. Okay? It is classified in the books of hadith. Right? But everyone quotes it as a hadith of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But no, this is the issue. It is the hadith that ends at Ibn Abbas. He is not saying Qala Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in this hadith. He said, we know, just to give the narration, that a man came from Asham and came to Ibn Abbas and said, oh, we have seen the moon on this day, and Muawiyah started fasting, and Ibn Abbas said, oh, we will not do that. He said, why? Oh, we have learnt, or we have understood this from Rasulullah. Here we can see it is the narration of Ibn Abbas, but the scholars, for example, Ashokani and the other scholars, they have explained that this is not a hadith of Rasulullah, it is the qawl. So it is ra'i of Sahaba. Although he said we understood this, he did not. Hadith is not narrated like that. We understood this meaning his own ijtihad, his own understanding. Okay? So it doesn't fit within the category. Ibn Abbas said we will not fast based upon the citing of Muawiyah. Yeah? We will not fast. So we follow our own citing. So people use that saying local citing versus global citing. So local citing, they say Ibn Abbas said. And the Shafi'is in history, they're the ones who followed that and said Ibn Abbas said that local citing. So, but that is not daleel. This is the point here. That's ra'i of Sahaba. That's his ijtihad. So when there is a conflict between the opinion of a Sahabi versus text of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, then the qawl of the messenger is hadith of the messenger which overrides. So the multiple narrations, ones which are in Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari, Sumu li ru'yatih wa aftiru li ru'yatih. Fast when the moon is sighted, and here the language in the Arabic is general. Fast when the moon is sighted by anyone. It does not say when the moon is sighted by you individually or by you in a region. It's li ru'yatih general. Okay. Also, the other narration which is considered to be authentic, it is compiled in Al-Irwa. Even Albani he considers to be authentic, and it is narrated in more than 5 books of hadith. The narration of when a tribe came from outside Medina and they had sighted the moon, and Rasulullah, based upon their testimony and sighting, he ordered the Muslims, okay, to follow that. So we have, then there is a hadith which is considered, it is disputed, is in the Sunnah of Abu Dawud. Some say it is Hasan. Some who are more strict don't consider it. But anyway, there are many who consider it Hasan. where a man came and he was an individual. So for example, the Hanafi school considers authentic. So As-Sarkhasi in Al-Mabsut, in Bad al-Sana'i, the fiqh book of the Hanafi madhab, many books, they quote the narration that a man came, Rasulullah ﷺ asked him, he said, I have seen the moon. Okay, and the Prophet and the companion were fasting. Do you testify, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, yeah, and that I am the messenger of Allah? He said yes. He ordered the Muslims break their fast. Okay, so we see the issue here that the narrations of Rasulullah override the hadith, which is not a narration directly from the Prophet. Also, the point today is anyway, that's a different matter, we won't go too much into it in the fiqh, that even that opinion of ijtihad of Ibn Abbas, that is not applied in India, by the way. That's a nonsense. It is not applied, because that's about distance. The distance between Bangalore and Delhi is more than the distance between Makkah and maybe Asham. Okay, it's huge. But they would accept the testimony of somebody here, but not of the testimony of Lahore. Why? It's just Qawmiyah, it is Jahiliyyah, it's just nationalism. It's nothing to do. Pre-1947, the whole of India would be one. They would accept testimony of Lahore and Dhaka. But today they reject it. Why? It's because the British drew lines. So that is something else, that's become a problem. And anyway, that opinion of Ibn Abbas, even if somebody was to apply it, that's based upon his understanding of the reality of the time. Today the reality has become clear that the world, there is no two places in the world that more than one day apart. So we live within the same time. They could understand. Some of the scholars thought some of the Shafi'is thought maybe there are two moons. They thought maybe there can be two moons. Some scholars said the earth is on the back of a giant animal. Yes, in the books of scholars. That's why we see it's moving. They didn't know those things. Science was not understood. So they are forgiven for that. Okay. We'll continue in the other things. The khabar ahad or the had or riwayah ahad is a number less than mutawatir. So any number less than mutawatir. Okay, so it be 4 or 3 or 2 or 1. They are all khabar ahad. Now in khabar ahad there are 3 types, which applies to khabar ahad only. There is the mashhur, which is a hadith reported by at least 3 individuals in every class. So again, 3 from the Sahaba, 3 from Tabi'in, 3 from Tabi'in. So here the hadith is hadith mashhur. So it is a higher grade of khabar ahad because it's reported by many in each class. The aziz is a hadith reported by at least 2 in every class, and the gharib is a hadith reported by 1 in every class, so 1 or more classes. Okay, so these are sub-categorization within khabar ahad. Now within khabar ahad there are 3 broad categories in authenticity. Okay, there is the sahih, which means the sahih means the good or the sound. There is the da'if, which means the weak. Okay, and there is the hasan, which means the okay. You could translate it like that. It is okay. It is not bad. Yeah. So here we go into then there is subcategorization within da'if, which we will go into. So sahih is a hadith narrated by an adl, I just not known for misconduct. So somebody, for example, who is not a fasiq, who tells the truth, who is trustworthy. Okay, he is adil, he is a good person. Okay, and dabit, and he is accurate. So for example, you may have somebody adil, but they are not dabit. There are many brothers. We know them, they are good people, but they don't have good memories. You ask them what happened, they will give you different stories on the same thing, because they are not accurate in reportage. So for sahih, the person must be good character, he cannot be a fasiq, cannot be a sinner, must be good, and he must be accurate in the report. From another person of similar qualities, until the end of the report. The report should also exclude any shudud, i.e. disagreement with other credible reporters. So here, sahih, this is where your questions now come into. How do we know hadith is sahih? Okay, so they have classified. The hadith is sahih when all the reporters, they are just, i.e. they are categorized as good Muslims, trustworthy. Secondly, they are categorized as accurate. Okay, they don't add anything, they don't subtract, they are accurate people. And all of the chain, the whole chain has to be like that. Okay, so we have to have a chain, not just one, not just Ibn Umar. So if a hadith is reported by Nafi from Ibn Umar, now Nafi is also reliable, also is David. Okay, so here now the chain. So that is, and also exclude disagreement with other reporters, that there is no disagreement, okay, in that. So this becomes sahih, okay. That's why people, when we quote when we take fifth ID, we take only from sahih or hasan, not from da'if, okay. Sahih or hasan, because it has to be, sahih is the best, okay, after mutawatir, of course. So that is, we know it is credible. Hasan has two definitions. A hadith which means the requirements of sahih to a lesser degree. Okay, maybe let's say that it is reported by two narrators. Okay, or let's say it's reported by one narrator, but the first narrator, for example, Ibn Abbas, he is Thabit, and he is just. The second narrator, he has that same quality, but the third narrator is not. Okay, he is not so accurate, so maybe it is lesser degree, something else lesser. Okay, a hadith which is, some other scholars define a hadith which is acceptable by the majority of the fuqaha. So they say if the majority of the fuqaha accepted it as dalil, then it's hasan, yani they will not accept da'if. Okay. So that's the definition of hasan. The da'if is the weak hadith which does not meet the requirement of either the sahih or the hasan hadith. It can be one of the following. Okay. So here we just categorize. There's no need to go into each of these in too much detail with examples. We just for our own understanding, because here we're not studying ilm al-hadith. A hadith missing, which is missing more than one or more reporters, either at the beginning or the end of the isnad, in the middle or in the end. Okay, so mu'allaq, that's the type of da'if. So now it's easy. Da'if, there's something wrong. Something has gone wrong in that narration. It's da'if, and da'if cannot be used as dalil in ahkam sharia. Some scholars, like Ghazali, say da'if can be used not in ahkam, but as an encouragement. So like for example, Ihya Ulumuddin, many da'if narrations are there. He says that as long as it's in line with the concept of Islam, we can use it to encourage the Muslims. Okay, so that's what today it's become prominent. People follow because they're from the Sufi schools or prominent. They say, they quote many da'if narrations to encourage people in good deeds. Okay, so, or motivate them and things like that. But that's not a strong opinion. If it's da'if, how do we rely upon it? How do we know? It's something that we can't trust. It's from Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So we don't accept, we reject it. There is the Mu'addal hadith which is missing two or more consecutive reporters. The Munqati hadith which has interruption in the class, meaning it is reported from the Sahaba, then there is interruption. The Tabi'i is missed out. It just goes to Tabi. Ashadh, which is the hadith which is one or more credible reports something that disagrees with the other credible reporters. Mu'allal, whose sanad seems to be fine, but due to some reasons discovered by the scholars, it is discredited. But for example, they find out this person, his memory is bad in the chain. The chain seems okay, but meaning that everything adds up, but he's a very bad memory. Okay, he is known to invent things. He is known for this. So then they will consider da'if. The munkar is a hadith in which non-credible reporters convey a message which is in disagreement with what was reported by credible. And then mawdu we mean fabricated. It's just blatantly fabricated, it's just made up. I mean, somebody has just come in a time, and this is Rasulullah said this, it has no backing. It's just made up, invented. Yeah. So these are the categorization within the da'if. Don't worry too much, we don't need to know that in too much depth, but just to grasp the basics. So we know that it's a detailed science. As I said today, it is quite easy. It's an easy thing to find out if the hadith, which categories, because all the work has been done already. The Musnad of Imam Ahmad is 40,000 hadith. The books of the scholars of Takhrij, they are so detailed, it's just, everything is done. We just need to find that out, okay, and look at that. There are some people with their own stringent criterions, maybe, who are scholars, they may have their own, and they may differentiate and have, fair enough, okay, but generally the works of Sahih are there, and they are compiled, and they are easy to refer to, okay, so it's, we don't have to go through the whole thing from the beginning, okay. So even for the mujtahid doesn't have to be a muhaddith. As an example, mujtahid doesn't have to be muhaddith. Some people put that category, but that category contradicts the concept of ijtihad. Why? Why do you need to know 100,000 hadith by heart? You don't need to. The scholars use, the mujtahid, the Imam Malik used to do that. They used to know, and they used to know hundreds of thousands of hadith. Why? Because see, at that time to make ijtihad on one subject, like at any time, you need to know all the hadith on the subject. To do that now, it is impractical for you to consult all the books and find, it's like finding a needle in a haystack sometimes. You have to go and search, it's just easier to learn everything. So when something comes up, you just know, it's mentioned here, you find, and ijtihad is easy. Because you know all the texts. So today, like we say, we have database. We don't need to necessarily learn everything by heart. There are some people with that good capability. The priority today is ijtihad, not to be muhaddith. Okay? So that's something we should realize. Yeah. And okay, I will pause here. Any questions? Yes. No. Sahih is not qati. Only mutawatir is qati. Sahih is sound. For example, somebody rejects Sahih, they are not a kafir, they are fasiq. Okay? They are sinners because why? They are rejecting the reporter and rejecting something sound which contradicts clear-cut dalil. So that makes it a fisq. Okay? Because to accuse. Oh, okay, that's different. To reject a Sahih narration, i.e. an individual narration, for example, a narration about Dajjal, which is in Bukhari. If somebody rejects the narration like the Mu'tazila, they are sinful. But if somebody rejects taking Khabar Ahad as a source, somebody says, I reject taking Bukhari and Muslim and Khabar Ahad, the hadith as a source, then they are kafir, because they are rejecting mutawatir by doing that. Okay, why? Now we'll go a bit into this point. Okay, that when we look at this issue, the proof of following the Khabar Ahad as a source of Sharia, okay, is established by mutawatir from Rasul's time. It is established by ijma' of Sahaba, and even it is indicated by Quran. Okay, so let us look at that. In Quran, Allah tells us to have witnesses for action. In the case of theft, 2 witnesses, not 5, not mutawatir. So 2 can be used and must be used in reliable as testimony in the matter of hudud. So if Allah is telling us 2 are reliable, we cannot reject them. Similarly, Rasulullah accept the testimony of 1 in ta'zir case. Okay? Rasulullah used to send individuals to teach people the deen. He used to send individuals, 12 messengers to the kings. Right? So we have multiple evidence, and it's ijma', and that ijma' is again reported by Tawatur, that the Sahaba used to rely upon khabar ahad as a dalil. Okay? So for someone to reject khabar ahad as a source of Sharia, so he said, I reject Bukhari, I reject Muslim as a source, in terms totally khabar ahad, then that would be something which is contradicting the Tawatur. Okay? So that would be then going into kufr. But we have to put a proviso here. Someone like the Shia, who are from the Muslim categories of the Shia, they accept khabar ahad, but they reject the Sunni reporters. So they say that we do not consider them as adil, because they are aligned with the Sunni and the political opinion of the Sunnis, and therefore we accept our Imam. So they accept khabar ahad, but they have their own books of hadith. Kanzul A'mal, they have their own books of hadith, okay, that they rely on. So they will say, we will only take those narrations which we consider as, so they are sinful. Okay? They are not kafir, they are sinful. Because they are rejecting the Muslims who are trustworthy and just. So it's a sin. The scholars, they don't call them kafir. They consider them as Muslim but sinful. Okay? Those like, for example, the Jafaris and things like that. So, this matter must be appreciated. We scrutinize it. So sometimes somebody wants to raise an argument. The Sunni scholars also refer to Kanzul A'mal. You will find it in the Sunni books. They'll say narrating Kanzul A'mal. Kanzul A'mal is the book of the Shia. Okay, in narration. So we can refer to it, no problem. But sometimes, for example, the famous book that they quote, they say it is the book of Ali. Okay, it has been refuted as fabricated. Okay, it is just missing my mind now, the name of the book. Maybe you brothers know of it. It's very famous. They always quote it. It's just missing my mind. They say Ali, it's book of Ali. They always quote it. But that book is proved not to be from Ali. Okay, so we have to be careful. Just what they say doesn't mean it's true. We have to go into it. Yeah, we have to look into the criteria that sometimes they fabricate things and they invent things for their own political views to try and support the Imams. And also the Shia, there are two groups in history who are different than in Usul than the majority. They are the Shia and the Zahiriyah. The Shia, why are they different in Usul? Because when we talk about Sunnah, for us when we say Sunnah of Rasulullah, they say Sunnah of the infallibles. Not only Sunnah of the Prophet, the Sunnah of all the Imams. So for them, the qawl of Jafar al-Sadiq is Daleel. The qawl of Muhammad al-Baqir is Daleel. The qawl of Imam al-Hadi is Daleel. So they take the qawl because they say they are infallible, they are all masoom. So if they say something, it's Daleel. How can we reject? So for them, when they quote, when we talk about fiqh, we only refer to Kitab and Sunnah of Rasulullah. They say Sunnah of all the infallibles. So they make ijtihad based upon the Sunnah of Jafar al-Sadiq. Of course they're not. The Shia believe they are infallible. I'm saying all the infallibles in their view. But they use a logical, of course, deduction which is not accepted, rejected. But they say that there has to be a protector of the deen. Who is there to protect the deen after Rasulullah? Allah said He has protected the Quran. Who will protect it? There must be someone, and he should be from the bloodline of Rasulullah. And the Prophet said, Ali is my Mawla. He is my protector of my family, and therefore he is the one indicated. And therefore Ali and Hussein and Hassan and their lineage. Okay? So that is false, of course. It's an argument based on the mind, not based on the text. So anyway, the Shia are different, and the Zahiris are different because they are in Usul. They just accept the literal things. They don't accept qiyas. They don't accept the mahfum of many hadith. They don't look deep. They just look at it. That's why they were different in Usul-ul-Fiqh. Okay, both those are the two camps who are different than the majority, or what we say. We can say the majority of people say Ahlus Sunnah, whatever, but the majority were different to those two camps. we have already mentioned previously regarding, I think we gave the example of Shawwal, the book. The Prophet fasted 6 days of Shawwal, but which 6 days? Is it consecutive days? That's the yes, but it is not which, and that's ijtihad. Yes, of course. Ijtihad, let's say, just to clarify, ijtihad occurs in any area which is dhanni, i.e. something which is not known by the deen, in the deen by necessity, i.e. not something which is qat'i thubut, qat'i riwayah, and qat'i dalala. For example, there can be no ijtihad in the number of rak'ah for maghrib. There can be no ijtihad. Ijtihad in that would be kufr, not ijtihad. Right? Because it's definitive. But ijtihad appears in all areas, whether it's in Quran, but the dhanni meaning, whether it's hadith mutawatir, dhanni meaning, whether it's khabar ahad sahih, or hasan, dhanni meaning, or qat'i meaning, if there is, mukhtalif narrations, for example. Ijtihad occurs many cases, if we talk about sahih hadith, when there are conflicting narrations on the same issue, and they are both sahih. Now they need ijtihad to reconcile them, or to make an interpretation. So that's where ijtihad occurs. Yeah? Yeah, it can be, not always. So for example, the hadith which is in Sahih Muslim, whoever appoints a woman as a ruler will never be successful. This hadith is Sahih, khabar ahad, and qat'i in meaning, and there is no other text upon the matter. Therefore, the hukum is qat'i, but it's slightly different to the one which is qat'i riwayah, qat'i dalala. It's qat'i dalala, dhanni riwayah. So the one who rejects it is a fasik, not a kafir. Okay? So, if somebody rejects that, they become fasik. Why? Because they're rejecting the narrators, and that's fisq. Okay? But we cannot say they are kafir, because the riwayah, it's not absolutely part of the aqidah, because it is not definitive. Yeah? So that's why the scholars call the Mu'tazila as fasik, but not kafir. Because the Mu'tazila rejected many sahih hadith. Okay? So they reject azab al-qabr, for example. They reject some hadith to do with Dajjal. So the Ahmad ibn Hanbal and others will say that they are on dal, they are misguided, they are, but they did not say they are kafir. Yes. It's exactly what I have just said. The scholars distinguish by, they say that mutawatir is used for iman. And it's used to distinguish between a Muslim and a kafir. So it's part of the asal, the root of iman. So Allah has condemned us and told us in the Quran that وَإِنَّ الظَّنِّ لَا يُغْنِي مِنَ الْحَقِّ شَيْئًا, and the verily dhann and the haqq, there is no comparison between them. I.e. dhann, conjecture or speculative things, and haqq, definitive things, there is no comparison. Allah has condemned the Quraysh for following in dhann and following in doubt. So the scholars clearly say that when it comes to iman, they define even iman. They say iman is tasdeeq al-jazim. It is the decisive assent, the decisive belief, those things which are definite. So the root of iman is that those matters which are qat'i, okay, that we believe in. Now, say so there is a dhanni matter which is related to iman. It's related to iman, but is it part of distinguishing a mu'min and a kafir? No. For example, Aisha radiallahu anha disputed with the Sahaba on the issue of Isra and Mi'raj. It's related to iman. It's not to do with a'mal, not to do with action. She disputed because she was with the Prophet and she did not see him leave. So she said the Isra and Mi'raj is spiritual, not physical. It is the ruh that went to Jannah. And the Sahaba, they said, no, it is physical and spiritual. Okay, so there is an ikhtilaf within Iman. So it's furu of Iman. Not the usul of Iman, the branches of Iman. Not the root of Iman. Therefore, the thing, can we say the others are any of them are kuffar? No, because they had ikhtilaf. You can't even have ikhtilaf in branches of iman. Okay? So there is possibility in the branches to have differences. So we must appreciate here that in the root of iman, it is the absolutely definitive things. If somebody rejects it, they are disbelievers. Khalas. If there are matters which are branches of iman, so for example, to believe that the Dajjal will kill a man and raise him back to life, and then say that I am God, and the man will say to him, this hadith we know, that you're a liar. That is a branch of iman, because sahih, but to reject it is not kufr. So we accept it is tasdeeq, we accept it is trust, but it is not tasdeeq al-jazim, it is not decisive, absolutely 100% that the one who rejects it will become a kafir. Right? So it is considered from the branches of iman. Everyone accepts Zamakhshari as mufassir of Quran, Mu'tazila. Everyone accepts Qadi Abdul Jabbar, who is from Mu'tazila. People accepted the Khalifa al-Ma'mun as a Khalifa of the Muslim, but he is Mu'tazila. You see the issue? So some people who are shallow actually normally, and although I don't want to attack them specifically, but some from the literalists don't understand things deeply. And they just shallow and say, oh, you are saying this and you are saying that we can reject Sahih and therefore you are the... Who is saying we reject Sahih? We're not saying reject. We're saying the one who rejects not kafir. For example, I once debated with one man who tried to cause a fuss on this matter. I said to him, whoever says that the Qadiani are Muslims, what are they? He said they are kafir, right? Okay. Whoever says that the Mu'tazila are Muslim, what are they? He said, oh, they are Muslims. So I said, your opinion and my opinion is the same. Because he was just looking at very shallow. You are saying Khabar Ahad is not part of Iman. It's about semantics. It's just about words here. In the end, it means the same thing. Some of the Zahiri scholars, they say, for example, Iman and A'mal are the same thing. Okay? But just about classification and semantics. It's just about, well, for example, Rasulullah said that lifting litter from the road is part of Iman. So they take all of those and say, oh, lifting, Amal and Iman, these are semantics. What they do, then they subclassify. If I don't lift litter from the road, am I kafir? No. But if it's part of Iman, then am I... They say, no, there are different parts of Iman, the definitive and the action. So then it's subcategorization, it means nothing really. It's just semantics, it's just words. Let's carry on, I think. Reconciling a perceived conflict between two or more ahadith. Some have raised the point that there often appears to be conflicting ahadith on an issue. As a result, they have reached to the conclusion that we reject the both of these seemingly conflicting hadith, and others have even declared that the entire Sunnah must be rejected. Both of these approaches are completely wrong and absurd. However, one may wonder what would be done if there seems to be a conflict between two ahadith. Firstly, there can be no conflict whatsoever between the sayings and the actions of the Messenger of Allah, except in some such cases of abrogation. Okay? We have already studied abrogation. So we look first, is the matter abrogated? Maybe it's abrogated if there's a conflict. Okay? So to the Muslims, don't visit the graves. Then later on said visit the graves. So it's abrogated. As an example here, the hadith, okay? In this, the hadith used to prohibit the Muslim from visiting the graveyards, but this was abrogated. The rejection of the Sunnah cannot be claimed due to the case of abrogation, because the concept of abrogation is part of Islam. We have talked about that. It is also mentioned in the Quran, and even the Quran have ahkam which are abrogated. Secondly, sometimes the Sahaba reported a variety of actions by the Prophet. For example, there are reports that he made salah with his hands on his chest, and others said his hands were on his midsection. This doesn't indicate a conflict, rather it illustrates that He was doing both, and that either action is permissible during the salah. So all of the schools, the debate is what is mandub. The debate is not whether it is permitted. The debate is it recommended to do it? Okay? So the Hanbalis and the Shafi'is and so on, they are not saying it is haram to put the hand on the midsection. They say it is mubah, but they say it is recommended to do it on the chest. You see the point? So they are not rejecting the hadith. The debate is upon the hukm. Thirdly, if there was a seeming conflict between the speech and the action of the messenger, then this action is specifically for him, while the text or the statement is for the Muslim. An example of this is that he used to continuously fast day and night, while he prohibited the Sahaba from this practice. So meaning there may be the hadith is conflicting with the action of the messenger. He is doing one thing and telling the Sahaba something else. So here this is what we call takhsis, specification only for the Prophet. Okay? And there is sometimes just to show you in ijtihad there is debate. Sometimes there is debate. Okay? Within certain texts, are they specifically for the Prophet? Or are they not? Okay? So for example, the hadith, the ayah of Quran which says, O lamastumun nisa, if you touch the woman and you cannot find, this example we have covered already, and you cannot find water, make tayammum. So some scholars try to refute that by saying that there is Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in Salah, his leg used to touch Aisha, okay, and he used to carry on. So if it touches, it breaks the wudu, because the ayah is it's general for everyone. So this point again, here it comes to the issue that the scholars refute that by saying, no, this is specific for him. Okay? Because if the text of Quran is the text of Quran, it outweighs. Now if something, the action of the messenger contradicts it, it indicates that it's specific for him. Okay? So this is a matter which there's a debate. Some scholars say no, this means it is takhsis within the rule. They say your wife is excluded. So they say yes, if you touch another woman's hand, but your wife is excluded. Others say it indicates the wife and the maharim, because they make an analogy to say that all of the mahrams are excluded. But so this is now a debate with further ikhtilaf within the scholars. So that can happen often. Many of the detailed matters are like that. Now, examples of some hadith in which there seems to be a conflict. Okay, but then we will reconcile. We will show the ijtihad reconciles them. Regarding seeking help of the non-Muslims, we find the following hadith. There's a long narration. The Prophet was on the way to battle of Badr. A well-known courageous man joined him at the place, okay, of Haratul Wabra. Sahaba were very pleased to see him. When the man saw the Prophet, he said, I have come to fight with you and to get a share of the booty. So the Prophet asked, do you believe in Allah and His Messenger? He said no. The Prophet told him to return back. We are Muslims, we do not seek help from the mushriks. The Prophet proceeded in his way to Badr until he reached. The man again came and told the Prophet. The Prophet asked him the same question. He told him to return back. The man joined the Prophet again. So the Prophet asked him, do you believe it? And the man said yes. Then the Prophet said, hurry up and go and fight. So the man embraced Islam. The Prophet allowed him to go and fight. In another occasion, which is reported authentic again, we have the narration which the Prophet, that we see that he was on his way and a regiment asked, okay, who are they? The Sahaba told him they are from Banu Qaynuqa, the faction of Abdullah bin Salam. So the Prophet asked them, will you become Muslim? They declined. As a result, the Prophet ordered, we do not seek help from the mushriks. Okay, thus they became Muslims. Later on, there are many narrations such as this. Okay, so in other situations, the Messenger sought help of a Jewish individual of Khaybar and allowed even a mushrik to fight with him. These ahadith were used to justify the presence of American troops in Saudi Arabia during the Gulf War. Okay, so now these narrations have been misinterpreted completely to come out with a so-called ijtihad, which is not ijtihad because it is batil. You can't have ijtihad in the qat'i area. To ally with the kuffar against the believers is qat'i issue. But we see Ibn Uthaymin, Ibn Baz also signed the fatwa, okay, and gave justification for the troops to be in Saudi against the Muslims of Iraq, which is, they are considered as scholars, but how can we accept that? That is a batil thing. This is a munkar, it is an evil, and they are participating in that. So we reject their views. This can be reconciled in the following way. We find that sometimes he would allow non-Muslims to fight with him as individuals while he refused the help of non-Muslim groups. So when Banu Qaynuqa was coming, when the mushriks were coming in, the Prophet refused the groups, i.e. entities, states, to fight along with him. But he accepted individuals. There's another narration when the Prophet pointed to one of the men who had died after the war and said he is one of the people of the fire, but he was fighting on the side of the Muslims. So here it's indicating this point, okay? Then we just mentioned the point here that Gaddafi, the leader of Libya, he became a kafir by denying the Sunnah. He tried to exploit those conflicts in hadith, tried to pick conflicting hadith. We reject the hadith, okay? We reject the Sunnah. And this is apostasy. And many great dawah carriers who worked for Khilafah went to him, spent hours discussing with him, refuting him. And after that, he hung 13 of them in the universities throughout Libya. He killed them. And after that, the Shabab of Dawah in Libya, they issued a brilliant book, Refutation of the Aqidah of Gaddafi. It goes into this matter of hadith in depth. It's a very good book to read, which goes into this matter, explaining that the rejection of the hadith is apostasy. Also, Gaddafi it talks about some examples he used. He claims that Ali bin Abi Talib was told by the Messenger of Allah that he would be one of the people of paradise. He also used another hadith to say if two Muslims meet with their swords, both of them in the fire. Like Rasulullah said, Sibab al-Muslim fusuq wa qitalahum kufr. To accuse a Muslim is sin, and to fight him is disbelief. And the Prophet said, if the two people, Muslims, fight, one of them will be in the fire. Since Ali met Muawiyah in fighting, so he says that we reject the hadith now. How could the Prophet say he's a man of paradise, but he fought Muawiyah? And they're fighting Muslims, therefore the hadith are wrong. And that's not what it means here. He is manipulating, okay? In fact, he took the second hadith out of context. The second hadith is talking about two groups fighting out of fitna or kufr, i.e. if you fight for an illegitimate reason. If you fight for illegitimate reason, but if you fight the bughat, the rebels, we have clear dalil to fight a rebel who does not give bay'ah, okay, and he rebels against the Islamic State and he rebels against the Khalifa, it is allowed. So Ali radiallahu anh, he saw Muawiyah as a rebel. He is not giving the bay'ah, he is rejecting my authority, I will fight him. That's a legitimate view. Okay, we also have dalil from the Sunnah. For example, just to give some more detail, there was a man called Walid bin Uqba. Rasulullah appointed him to go to the tribe of Bani Mustalaq to go and collect the zakah. So, he went to Bani Mustalaq because of a previous problem he had with them. He did not collect it. He came to Rasulullah and he lied. He said, I went there and they were outside with their weapons. They were not going to give me the zakah. They did not want to give. So Rasulullah, based on his testimony, was about to dispatch the army to go and fight them. Then Allah revealed, this is the asbab al-nuzul, or the sabab al-nuzul of the ayah. Ya ayyuhallazina amanu, in ja'akum fasikum binaba'in fatabayyanu. Oh, if you believe, if the fasik brings you news, check it, meaning this man is a liar. Okay, Walid is lying here. Rasulullah checked the issue, and then we know that Allah has informed him he is a fasik, and he stopped the fighting. This is dalil. Somebody who rebels, even on one of the ahkam sharia, they did not become kuffar, but they are not wanting to pay zakah. You can fight them. Right? So this is a dalil that Ali radiallahu anh fought those who rejected. He fought the Khawarij, he fought the Muawiyah. So, although they were Muslims. So this is not a contradiction. In fact, this is a specified rule. He's just playing around with the text to give his own logic on that. Okay. So. Yes. Yes, again, he used the same dalil. You can see, he did not quote it, but we know. He had already dalil from Sunnah to fight those, because the Prophet was about to fight those who do not pay zakah. So this is also a sunnah of politics, i.e. of ruling, if the one doesn't give, and that's also from the general evidences of the bughat, of the rebels. The rebels can be fought for many dalil anyway. Okay? So here the issue is that that's a rebellion, it's considered a rebellion against the Khalifa. Okay? Right, we can pause here. Any questions on that?
Is it permitted for any person to try to reconcile hadith?
No, what we call tarjih, or outweighing of the evidences, a muqallid mutabbi, i.e. one who is not a mujtahid, can do it to feel the opinion he is following is correct, or by his own to feel tranquility. But he cannot make ijtihad. Okay? So he can look at the text by what the mujtahid has argued, and look, and feel that, okay, my opinion is good, that I am following is based on evidence. But until he grasps the whole subject in depth with the language and with the conditions of ijtihad, he is not permitted to make istinbat. He cannot extract the rule by outweighing. Okay? That is for the mujtahid. So we can say, the opinion I follow is this, and we can argue the evidence. Okay? Based upon the works of the mujtahid and by still studying the evidence. But we cannot say, if we are not mujtahid, that this is the correct opinion, or this is my view. Because it's not your view. You are still making taqleed. You are still following a scholar's view. Yeah? So we have to, appreciate that. If we are not mujtahid, then we are muqallid. We should not go beyond our realm. Yeah? So the application of sunnah. Sunnah can be applied in 5 ways. Here it's just subcategorization. It's not very difficult to understand. Allah Azza wa Jalla, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ. Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, "Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli." Pray as you see me pray. So we know the issue here, that the sunnah can explain a word which is not explained in Quran. Allah says, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ, and the Prophet explains, Salah is pray as you see me pray. Okay, the same is the clarification of rules, Hajj, Zakah, Jihad, ruling many other things. The Quran mentions a general term which could be applied to any person, while the Sunnah further specifies the term and forms another rule. For example, the ayat about the Zaniya, okay, Fajlidu, flog them, meaning lash them with 100 lashes. This rule can be applied upon any Zaniya, but the rule has been applied to any male and female who is found guilty of zina. However, the Messenger ﷺ stoned the married ones. The ones who are married were stoned to death. So this is specifying the rule of what is mentioned in Quran. It is not abrogation, it is what we call takhsis, specification. It's specifying the rule for the non-married zaniya, that they are lashed. Okay. Another example here, Muslim extracted in the Sahih authority of Ibn Umar, that the Messenger stoned to death a Jewish man and a Jewish woman for committing zina. Okay. It's from hadith. The rule may be mentioned in Quran without any restriction, but the Sunnah places restrictions. Okay, for example, the rule in Quran, وَسَارِقُ وَسَارِقَةُ فَقْتُهُ أَيْدُهُمَا, the male and female, cut off their hands. There is no restriction. Here it looks like any male and female thief, khalas, everyone. But the Sunnah, it specifies many things. The Sunnah places certain restrictions on the punishment, some of which are the stolen property must be equal to a nisab, a certain amount of gold, which amounts to a quarter of a dinar of gold. The property must be stolen from a place which is where wealth is usually kept, a private place, and other ones. It cannot be in the time of famine, it cannot be food, it cannot be from relatives, we have covered earlier. So here, again, it's specifying general things, it's given many details. The jewelry, it gives example, if it's left open, somebody steals it, then it is not, his hand is not cut. There is another punishment, meaning it's from a public place, from a market. Then there is another punishment, it's ta'zir, doesn't fall under hudud, doesn't fall under cutting. Okay. An original rule in Quran which is explained has neither restrictions nor exceptions, but the Sunnah adds new items to the original rule. For example, Allah said, حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمْ forbidden to you are your mothers, your daughters, your paternal and maternal aunts, your nieces, your foster mothers, and sisters, mothers-in-law, and stepdaughters. So here these are forbidden in marriage. Okay? But the Sunnah added a new thing here, some other things. Rasulullah said, no woman can be married to a man who is already married to her sister or paternal aunt. It is not mentioned in the ayah, it's mentioned in the hadith. So if you are married to a woman, you cannot also marry her sister. At the same time, although you are allowed to marry 2 wives or 3 or whatever, but you can't marry her sister. Or her paternal or maternal aunt. Okay? Also from the Sunnah, men are prohibited from marrying the woman who breastfed them. The Sunnah adds that to the original rule. So for example, the milk mother, it is called the milk mother, is considered like your mother. She is your mahram. The one who is milk mother, we have dalil from Sunnah, the milk mothers were like mahram. So you treat her like mahram. Okay, so again this is dalil. Okay, a rule originating from the Sunnah and not Quran. This is the next category. Maybe there is a rule not from Quran but from the Sunnah. Like الناس شركاء في ثلاث الماء والكلى والنار. The people are partners in 3 things: the water, the graze, and the fire, which includes the power, i.e. the oil, the gas, and the fuel in the Muslim world. So this establishes the rule that these things are public wealth, they are not private wealth. So these are just 5 ways or that the Sunnah it elaborates, it adds conditions, it adds new things. It also, there can be ahkam purely from the Sunnah. So it's the way, what we call the application of the Sunnah. Okay, so this is to be appreciated. We should get out of our minds those things who think that the fard is from Quran and the recommended is from Sunnah. That is not true. As we have already explained that, okay, the Sunnah also can have the fard or the haram or the makruh or the mubah. It can do many of those things, right? So the Sunnah is the second source of law in Islam, and therefore we must take it as that. Okay? Any questions before we end? No?
And this hadith,
Yes.
no woman can be married to a man already married to her sister or her maternal or paternal aunt.
Yes.
Does that mean these men become mahram?
No. They are not mahram. They are just prohibited in marriage. Okay. So your sister-in-law is not the mahram. So for example, you cannot be alone with her, but you just cannot marry her.
Okay.
But your mother-in-law, she becomes, for the time of marriage, she becomes mahram. So she does not have to cover in front of you. Yeah, so what? Still the rule has to be taken, because most of the ahkam sharia from khabar ahad, as we said, that mutawatir concept is that khabar ahad has to be relied upon in